Elijah King had never questioned the path his life was on. To him, faith was a steady river, quiet, reliable, and full of promise. He believed in God's goodness because everything in his life reflected it. A good job, a loving family, a welcoming church, and a comfortable home in the suburbs. He had grown up hearing stories of faith in the Bible, Abraham's journey, Joseph's endurance, Daniel's courage. He read the promises that God makes to those who trust him, and he tucked those words in his heart like treasure. But now, as the thunderstorm rumbled outside and lightning split the dark sky, Elijah felt like he was standing in the middle of a hurricane. The steady river of his life had turned into raging rapids, and he was struggling to keep his head above the water. It started like any ordinary day. Elijah sat in the glass-walled conference room, the hum of the office behind him fading into silence. The human resources manager, a kind but weary woman named Linda, cleared her throat. "Elijah, we regret to inform you that due to company restructuring, your position has been eliminated." The words hit him like a hammer. 11 years at the firm, and just like that, he was out. He left the building in a daze, his briefcase feeling heavier than ever. The familiar streets blurred past his car windows as he drove home. How was he going to tell Amara? How were they going to pay the mortgage? The bills? The doctor's appointments? When Elijah walked through the door, Amara was already there, making dinner. Her smile was warm but tired. "Hey," she said softly. He forced a smile. "We need to talk." She set the spatula down and took his hands in hers. "It's going to be okay," she said. But Elijah saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. That night, Elijah lay awake staring at the ceiling. The prayers he'd whispered in the past felt hollow now. He felt abandoned, betrayed. How could God let this happen? Days later, the news came. The doctor's words sliced through their fragile hope. Amara had cancer. Elijah sat frozen, trying to process the weight of those 6 letters. Cancer. Everything they'd planned, their dreams for Miriam, their future together, seemed to shatter. Elijah retreated into silence. He didn't want to pray. He didn't want to talk. One evening, after Miriam had fallen asleep, Elijah opened his Bible at random. The pages fell open to the book of Job. He read, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him, I will maintain my integrity before him." Job 13 verse 15. The word struck him deeply. Could he say that? Could he trust God even if everything was lost? The next morning, Elijah sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at a steaming cup of coffee. The rain tapped against the window like a mournful song. He thought about Noah, how he had built an ark when no storm had come. About Abraham, called to leave everything familiar, to trust a promise he had never seen fulfilled. Could Elijah trust God like that? He picked up a pen and began to write in a journal. "God, I don't understand. The path ahead is dark. But you promised to be with me. Help me to trust you even when I can't see the way." A week later, Elijah received a call from Jonathan, an old friend from church. "We're starting a new outreach center in town," Jonathan said. "We need someone to lead it. I know it's not what you're used to, but it's meaningful work." Elijah hesitated. The job paid less, and he was still reeling from the diagnosis. But as he prayed, a sense of peace settled over him. He accepted. At the outreach center, Elijah found a new rhythm. He worked with homeless families, helped run food drives, and led Bible studies. The work was hard and exhausting, but it gave him a new sense of purpose. One evening, Luis, a former gang member recently released from prison, approached him. "Why do you help people like me?" Luis asked. "Because someone helped me when I was lost," Elijah replied. "And because I believe God can change any heart." Luis nodded thoughtfully. Then, just as they had begun to hope, Amara's cancer returned aggressively. The doctor recommended an experimental treatment, but it wasn't covered by their insurance. Elijah felt the crushing weight of helplessness all over again. Elijah sat in the hospital chapel and thought of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who faced the fiery furnace but trusted God to be with them no matter what. Even if he does not rescue us, Elijah prayed, we will not bow. Days later, Luis came to the outreach center with an envelope. I sold some things and got a settlement, he said. God told me to give it. The envelope contained $75,000, enough to cover Amara's treatment. Amara's health improved. The tumor shrank. Miriam laughed and danced again. Elijah's faith grew deeper, not because God had fixed everything, but because God had been present in the struggle. Elijah began to speak at churches about his journey. He shared how trust in God isn't about having all the answers, but about holding on even when the path is uncertain. He reminded his listeners of Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. The weeks that followed tested Elijah in ways he hadn't imagined. Amara's treatment was grueling, long hospital visits, harsh side effects, moments where hope flickered like a candle in a gale. Elijah found himself drifting through days that blended into nights. The quiet of the house was punctuated by the steady beep of medical machines and the soft footsteps of nurses. Miriam missed her mother's energy, and Elijah worried about the childhood memories being rewritten by illness. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Elijah sat alone in the living room. The house was still except for the hum of the heater. He held the Bible on his lap but didn't open it. He whispered, God, I want to trust you, but sometimes it feels impossible. If you're here, why does it hurt so much? His heart echoed with the lament of Psalm 13. How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? The next morning, the phone rang. It was Pastor Ray. Elijah, I know things have been hard. I just wanted you to know we're praying for you, and the whole church is behind you. Elijah felt a spark of warmth. Community mattered more than he'd realized. Later that day, the outreach center's doors opened to a group of volunteers who had come out of the woodwork, inspired by Elijah's story. During a small group Bible study at the center, Elijah shared Joseph's story, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, imprisoned, yet eventually rising to power because he trusted God's plan. Joseph didn't understand what was happening, Elijah said, but he stayed faithful. And God used his pain for good. Luis listened intently, wiping tears away. One night, the power went out during a thunderstorm. The house was plunged into darkness, mirroring Elijah's heart. Amara, weak but determined, reached for his hand. Elijah, even in this darkness, I feel God's presence. Elijah squeezed her hand, holding on to hope. They lit candles, sat together, and read Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 23 verse 4. One afternoon, a stranger showed up at the outreach center. She introduced herself as Rachel, a nurse who had worked with cancer patients for over a decade. I heard about Amara, she said quietly. I'd like to help however I can. Rachel began volunteering to drive Amara to treatments and offered nursing advice. Her presence was a balm to Elijah's weary soul. Elijah's days became a balance of leading the center, caring for Amara, and raising Miriam. There were moments of joy. Miriam's first school recital, small improvements in Amara's health. There were setbacks too. A relapse scare. A broken furnace in the middle of winter. Through it all, Elijah clung to Romans 8 verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. The church organized a prayer vigil for Amara. Dozens gathered, holding hands, lifting voices. Elijah was overwhelmed by the love and faith surrounding him. That night, as he lay beside Amara, he felt a peace that transcended understanding. Inspired by the support, Elijah dreamed bigger. He wanted the outreach center to do more, to be a sanctuary for those in crisis, a place where broken lives could find healing. He began to plan a program for cancer patients and families, offering emotional and spiritual support. Elijah often reflected on Joshua's charge to be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1 verse 9. He repeated the verse like a mantra on the hardest days. One evening, Elijah sat by the window, watching the stars. The storm had passed, but the scars remained. He whispered a prayer of surrender. Lord, I don't know what the future holds, but I trust you. Help me to rest in your promises even when I can't see the way. And in that moment, a profound calm settled over him, a quiet assurance that God was faithful, even in the storm. As the months passed, Elijah learned that trusting God was not a one-time decision but a daily commitment. Each morning brought fresh challenges, Amara's fluctuating health, financial stress, and the weight of responsibility at the outreach center. One evening, after a long day of meetings and hospital visits, Elijah sat alone at the kitchen table, worn out and discouraged. Why does it feel like everything I build is falling apart? He wondered aloud. He opened his Bible to 1 Peter 1:6-7. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, may result in praise, glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Elijah closed the book and whispered, Lord, refine my faith. Make me like gold. The outreach center grew steadily, and with it came a diverse tapestry of people, broken, hopeful, searching for meaning. Luis became a trusted friend and mentor to younger men struggling to leave gang life behind. Rachel expanded her nursing ministry, offering care and comfort to the sick. Elijah watched the seeds of faith blossom in ways he hadn't imagined. One Sunday, the church invited Elijah to share his testimony. Standing before the congregation, he spoke honestly about fear, doubt, and the struggle to trust God. I've learned that faith doesn't erase the storm, he said, but it anchors us in the storm. God's presence is the lifeline. The congregation responded with tears and prayers. Despite progress, Amara's health remained fragile. One night, she awoke in pain, calling out for Elijah. At the hospital, the doctors delivered sobering news, a new complication threatening her recovery. Elijah felt the crushing weight of the valley of shadows. In that moment, Psalm 34 verse 18 echoed in his heart. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. He took Amara's hand and prayed fervently, asking for strength to endure whatever lay ahead. In quiet moments, Elijah often reflected on Joseph's resilience, how God transformed betrayal, imprisonment, and loss into a divine purpose. He clung to the truth that no matter how dark the night, God's light was never far. Elijah shared Joseph's story with Miriam, hoping to teach her the power of hope. The Outreach Center launched the new support program for cancer patients and families. It offered counseling, prayer groups, and practical help. The community rallied. Donations poured in. Volunteers stepped forward. Amara, despite her illness, found joy in volunteering to help others, a testament to the sustaining power of grace. Elijah realized that trials were not just obstacles, but opportunities for growth. He saw the refining fire shaping his character, patience, compassion, faith. He thought of Daniel, who remained faithful in exile, trusting God's sovereignty despite the fiery furnace and lion's den. One afternoon, after a difficult day, Elijah returned home to find Amara resting peacefully. He sat beside her, overwhelmed with gratitude. God's peace is real, he said softly. Amara smiled, squeezing his hand. Elijah's journey taught him that trusting God meant letting go of control and embracing mystery. He remembered Jesus' words in John 20 verse 29. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. He resolved to walk by faith, not by sight. As winter thawed into spring, new life stirred around them. Miriam's laughter filled the house. The outreach center blossomed into a beacon of hope. Elijah sensed that though the storm had not passed, God was guiding them toward a brighter horizon. Spring had arrived with a softness that belied the storm still raging within Elijah's heart. The cherry blossoms in the neighborhood bloomed in brilliant pinks and whites, a quiet reminder of renewal and promise. But inside their modest home, Elijah and Amara faced an uneasy calm. Amara's treatments had stabilized her condition, but the uncertainty loomed like a shadow. Every scan, every test brought a new wave of anxiety. Miriam, now 7, was beginning to understand that her mother was fragile. Elijah found himself slipping between moments of hopeful optimism and crushing doubt. The weight of leading the outreach center, supporting Amara, caring for Miriam, and maintaining his own faith was exhausting. One afternoon, Elijah sat in the park watching Miriam play. The sun was warm on his face, but a storm brewed inside him. He opened his Bible to Ecclesiastes 3 verses 1-8. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. He closed the book slowly. Could he embrace this season, even if it was filled with pain? Jonathan, the old friend who had offered Elijah the outreach center leadership, stopped by one evening with a basket of food and words of encouragement. Elijah, your faith in the middle of all this is a beacon for many. Don't lose heart. Elijah smiled, grateful for the reminder that he was not alone. That night, he prayed for renewed strength. One morning, Miriam approached her father with a drawing. It's a picture of our family, she said proudly. See, there's God watching over us, and He's holding our hands. Elijah felt tears prick his eyes. In the midst of suffering, the innocence of a child reminded him of God's gentle presence. The outreach center began partnering with local hospitals to provide spiritual support to patients and families. Elijah found renewed purpose in these partnerships, seeing how God's love could reach even the darkest hospital rooms. He invited Rachel to lead workshops on faith and healing, blending medical care with spiritual encouragement. Elijah's nightly ritual became reading the Psalms aloud with Amara and Miriam. Psalm 46 became a favorite. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. These words became a fortress of hope amid uncertainty. One evening, as Elijah walked home from the center, a stranger handed him an envelope. Inside was a note, for Amara's medical expenses. From a friend who believes in miracles. Along with the note was a generous check. Elijah's heart swelled with gratitude. God's provision was real and tangible. Inspired by the generosity, Elijah launched a fundraiser to expand the outreach center's services. The community responded with overwhelming support, donations, volunteers, and prayers. Elijah saw how trusting God opened doors that human hands could not. Amara's health gradually improved. The treatments worked better than expected. The doctors expressed cautious optimism. Elijah and Amara celebrated small victories, an afternoon walk, a family dinner, a night without pain. Elijah realized that trusting God was a journey of persistence, through doubt, fear, and triumph. He embraced the words of Isaiah 40 verse 31. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, they will run and not grow weary, they will walk and not be faint. With renewed faith, Elijah looked forward to the future, uncertain, yes, but filled with God's unending presence. Just as Elijah and Amara began to feel the fragile stirrings of hope, life threw another curveball. Miriam's school called one afternoon. She had been having trouble focusing in class and was falling behind. Elijah and Amara sat in the quiet of their living room, grappling with yet another worry. Was the stress and uncertainty of their family's health struggles affecting Miriam more deeply than they realized? Elijah turned to James 1 verse 5, seeking guidance. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. He prayed earnestly for clarity, patience, and strength to support Miriam. The next day, Elijah met with Miriam's teacher, Mrs. Daniels, who shared her concerns but also encouragement. Miriam is bright and kind, she said, she just needs some extra attention and support. Together, they devised a plan: tutoring sessions after school, more parental involvement, and gentle encouragement. Elijah and Amara committed to being present in Miriam's academic life, setting aside time each evening for homework and reading. Though exhausted, Elijah saw the importance of investing in his daughter's future. Through this, the family grew closer, bound by faith and love. One evening, Elijah read the story of David facing Goliath. He saw parallels in their own battles, giants of fear, illness, and uncertainty. David's faith was simple yet profound, trusting that God was bigger than any problem. Elijah whispered, "Lord, be our strength against the giants." The outreach center continued to thrive, becoming a hub of hope in the neighborhood. Luis shared his testimony at a community event, inspiring others to break free from their pasts. Rachel organized health workshops, blending physical and spiritual care. Elijah marveled at how God was weaving their stories together into a tapestry of healing. One evening, as Elijah prayed beside Amara's hospital bed, she squeezed his hand. "I'm ready to fight, Elijah," she said with quiet determination. Her courage lifted Elijah's spirit. He quoted Isaiah 41 verse 10. "So do not fear, for I am with you, do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you." Amara's scans showed significant improvement. The doctors called it a miracle. Elijah and Amara knew the truth: it was God's faithfulness shining through the darkness. Elijah began teaching Miriam about trusting God through stories from the Bible: Noah's Ark, Moses leading the Israelites, Jesus calming the storm. He wanted her to know that faith wasn't about a perfect life, but about holding on through the storms. The family celebrated milestones: Miriam's improved grades, a clear scan for Amara, and the outreach center's growing impact. Elijah realized that trusting God meant embracing both the struggles and the victories. One evening, Elijah journaled, "Lord, thank you for being our rock in the storm. Help us to keep trusting, keep hoping, and keep loving." His faith was deeper, forged through fire and sustained by grace. Spring had fully settled in, and with it came a fresh sense of hope. The cherry blossoms had long since faded, but their promise of new life lingered in Elijah's heart. Amara's health continued to improve, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about her full recovery. Miriam was thriving in school, her confidence blooming alongside her academic progress. Elijah felt a stirring deep within, a call to embrace this new season with courage and gratitude. One afternoon, Elijah sat quietly in the outreach center's prayer room, reflecting on his journey. He remembered the bitterness he had felt toward circumstances beyond his control: the illness, the uncertainty, the pain. He opened his Bible to Ephesians 4 verses 31 to 32. "Get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." Elijah prayed for a heart free from resentment and full of forgiveness, for himself and others. With renewed grace, Elijah reached out to estranged family members, seeking reconciliation. He found that healing extended beyond physical restoration; it touched broken relationships and mended old wounds. The outreach center became a place where stories of forgiveness and redemption were shared openly, encouraging others to seek peace. Elijah felt God's call to expand the center's mission. He envisioned a holistic ministry, combining spiritual teaching, counseling, health care, and community development. Rachel and Luis joined him in planning new programs, including youth mentorship and health education workshops. Elijah found inspiration in the story of Nehemiah rebuilding Jerusalem's walls amidst opposition and doubt. Nehemiah's faith and perseverance reminded Elijah that restoration was a process, sometimes slow, often challenging, but always purposeful. He encouraged his team with Nehemiah 2 verse 20. "The God of heaven will give us success. We his servants will start rebuilding." The community gathered for a celebration marking Amara's remission and the Outreach Center's anniversary. There was music, laughter, and testimonies of hope. Elijah shared his testimony again, this time filled with joy and gratitude. He spoke of trusting God not only through the storm but also in the calm. Miriam, now 8, led a small children's prayer group at the center. Her innocent faith and enthusiasm inspired everyone around her. Elijah marveled at how God was raising a new generation to trust him deeply. Elijah clung to the promises found throughout Scripture, Jeremiah 29 verse 11, Psalm 37 verse 4, and Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." These verses became the foundation of his renewed hope. As the Outreach Center grew, Elijah began training new leaders, passing on the vision and mission. He understood that trusting God included trusting others to carry the work forward. Late one night, Elijah sat on the porch, watching the stars. He whispered a prayer of quiet confidence. "Lord, I don't know what lies ahead, but I know you are faithful. I will trust you with all my heart." The journey was far from over, but Elijah knew he was not walking it alone. Just as Elijah felt the horizon brighten, life brought unexpected storms. A severe economic downturn hit the neighborhood, threatening the Outreach Center's funding. Many families who once relied on the center now faced their own struggles: job losses, eviction notices, hunger. Elijah wrestled with feelings of helplessness. How could he lead when resources were shrinking? Elijah gathered his team and the community for a day of fasting and prayer. They leaned on James 5 verse 16. "The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective." The room was filled with heartfelt prayers for provision, wisdom, and hope. Elijah felt God's presence deeply, a steady anchor amid uncertainty. Just when the situation seemed dire, an anonymous donor stepped forward, offering a generous gift to sustain the center. Elijah was reminded of Elijah the prophet fed by ravens during famine, 1 Kings 17. God's provision, often unexpected, arrived in perfect timing. One day, a woman named Grace came to the center seeking prayer. She had battled chronic illness for years. Elijah and Rachel prayed over her with faith. Weeks later, Grace returned, testifying to a remarkable healing. Elijah saw God's power alive and active. Elijah reflected on 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." He understood that his own weakness was an opportunity for God's strength to shine. Miriam faced bullying at school because of her family's struggles. Elijah comforted her with the words of Jesus in Matthew 5 verse 10. "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Together, they prayed for courage and resilience. The hardships drew the community closer. Neighbors helped each other with food, childcare, and encouragement. The Outreach Center became a hub of mutual support and faith. Luis shared his story at a community event, a story of redemption from gang life to faith and leadership. His journey inspired many to believe that change was possible through trusting God. Elijah received a surprise visit from his estranged brother, David. After years of silence, David sought reconciliation. They embraced, tears flowing. Elijah saw God's hand healing even the deepest wounds. Through trials and miracles, Elijah held fast to Romans 15 verse 13. "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him." His faith was tested but never broken. After months of trials, Elijah awoke one morning to birdsong in a clear sky. It felt like a new beginning. Amara's health continued to improve steadily, and Miriam's schoolwork blossomed. The outreach center not only survived the financial crisis but grew stronger. Elijah knew this was a season of restoration. He reflected on Lamentations 3 verses 22 to 23. Because of the Lord's great love we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning, great is your faithfulness. This truth carried Elijah through each sleepless night and uncertain day. The reconciliation with his brother David opened the door for family healing. They began rebuilding relationships with other relatives, creating a new foundation of forgiveness and love. Elijah and his team planned new initiatives at the outreach center, workshops on job skills, parenting, and financial literacy. They dreamed big, trusting God to lead. Miriam's faith deepened, and she shared her story at youth gatherings, inspiring peers to trust God. Neighbors who once struggled were now finding hope and purpose. Elijah saw lives changed, not by chance but by God's grace. One evening, Elijah prayed, "Lord, thank you for your faithfulness. Help me to be faithful in return." The Outreach Center celebrated its 5th anniversary with a community festival. Stories of transformation echoed through the crowd, people whose lives had been touched by God's love. Elijah trained new leaders, ensuring the ministry would continue long after he was gone. Miriam, now a confident young girl, promised to carry forward the legacy of trust and service. Elijah read Hebrews 11, the Faith Hall of Fame, and saw his own story among those who trusted God against all odds. Elijah wrote letters to Miriam and others, encouraging them to keep trusting God no matter what storms come. Elijah felt a deep peace, knowing that trusting God had transformed his life and community. Elijah understood that trusting God was a lifelong journey, one that continued beyond this life. His story became a testimony to God's unfailing love and power to restore. Elijah often returned to Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. He invited all who heard his story to embrace trust in God, no matter their circumstance. The story closed not with an ending but with a beginning, trusting God every day, walking by faith, and living in hope.